Gene Hackman told a director to shut up, then disappeared for 20 years, April 14th, 2003, 2:47 in the afternoon, Port Perry, Ontario. Gene Hackman is standing in the middle of a fake hardware store. He's wearing a gray suit that costs more than most people's cars. His jaw is clenched. His eyes are locked on a man walking toward him with a clipboard. The man is Donald Petrie, the director. Petrie stops 3 feet away from Hackman. He's smiling. He doesn't know what's about to happen. "Gene, that was great, but I'm thinking maybe we try it again with a little more." Hackman cuts him off. "Shut the fuck up and get out of my way." 8 words, spoken quietly. No shouting, no dramatics. Just 8 words delivered with the kind of cold authority that makes grown men step backward. Petrie's smile disappears. The crew freezes. 30 people standing perfectly still, holding their breath. Hackman doesn't wait for a response. He turns his back on the director and walks to his mark. "Let's go again," he says. "My way." Nobody argues. Nobody speaks. The camera rolls. And that moment, on that afternoon, in that small Canadian town pretending to be Maine, becomes the last real scene of Gene Hackman's 40-year career. Because after Welcome to Mooseport wrapped, Gene Hackman walked away from Hollywood. No press conference, no farewell interview, no explanation. He simply vanished. For the next 20 years, until the day he died, nobody could get him to come back. To understand what happened on that set, you need to understand who Gene Hackman was by the spring of 2003. He was 73 years old, 2-time Academy Award winner, 5 nominations total, over 70 films. He had worked with William Friedkin, Francis Ford Coppola, Clint Eastwood, Arthur Penn, Wes Anderson. He had played cops and criminals, presidents and prisoners, heroes and villains, and he had fought with almost every director he'd ever worked with. "I have trouble with authority," Hackman once told an interviewer. "I always have, since I was a kid." It started with his father, Eugene Ezra Hackman, a man who walked out on his family when Gene was 13 years old, just drove away one afternoon with a casual wave goodbye and never came back. Gene Hackman learned something that day. He learned that the people in charge will abandon you. He learned that authority figures can be trusted, and he learned that if you want to survive, you have to fight for yourself. He carried that lesson into every film set he ever worked on. William Friedkin, who directed Hackman to his first Oscar in The French Connection, used to deliberately insult him between takes. "You better get a day job, pal," Friedkin would say, "because this isn't working out." He did it to make Hackman angry, to tap into that rage, and it worked. But it also meant Hackman walked off set multiple times during production. Wes Anderson, who directed Hackman in The Royal Tenenbaums just 2 years before Mooseport, had an even worse experience. Angelica Houston, who played Hackman's wife in that film, later told Anderson in front of a crowd, "He told you to pull up your pants and act like a man." Bill Murray, another co-star, was so worried about Anderson that he came to set on his days off just to stand between Hackman and the young director. "I used to kind of step in there," Murray said after Hackman's death, "and just try to defend my friend." According to multiple reports, Hackman called Anderson something so offensive that the entire crew went silent. The word started with C. It wasn't complimentary. And yet, The Royal Tenenbaums was a masterpiece. Hackman won a Golden Globe for his performance. Critics called Royal Tenenbaum one of the greatest characters he ever played. That was the paradox of Gene Hackman. Impossible to work with, terrifying to direct, and capable of delivering performances that made everyone forget the chaos. But by 2003, something had changed. In 1990, Hackman had suffered severe angina while working on a film. He needed an emergency angioplasty. The doctors told him his heart was under too much stress. They told him to slow down. Hackman ignored them. He kept working. 10 more years, 20 more films, and then his body started sending stronger messages. The straw that broke the camel's back, Hackman would later reveal, was actually a stress test that I took in New York. The doctor advised me that my heart wasn't in the kind of shape that I should be putting it under any stress. That stress test happened sometime in late 2003 or early 2004, after Mooseport had wrapped, after the damage was done. But on that April afternoon in Port Perry, Hackman didn't know yet that his heart was failing. He just knew that he was tired, bone tired, 40 years tired, and he knew that he was not going to take notes from Donald Petrie. Petrie wasn't a bad director. He had made Miss Congeniality with Sandra Bullock. He had made How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days with Kate Hudson and Matthew McConaughey. He knew how to handle movie stars, but Gene Hackman was not Sandra Bullock. A crew member who worked on Mooseport later described the atmosphere on set. You could feel it from day one. Gene didn't want to be there. He was professional, always knew his lines, always hit his marks, but there was this tension, like a storm waiting to break. The storm broke that afternoon. According to accounts that spread through Hollywood in the years that followed, Petrie had been giving Hackman notes all week, small suggestions, adjustments to line readings, ideas about character motivation. Each time, Hackman had listened politely, and each time, he had done the scene exactly the way he wanted to do it. But on April 14th, something snapped. Maybe it was the specific note Petrie gave him. Maybe it was the accumulation of a week's worth of interference. Maybe it was the exhaustion of a man who had been doing this for 4 decades and suddenly realized he couldn't do it anymore. Whatever it was, when Petrie walked up to him with that clipboard and that smile and started to say, "I'm thinking maybe we try it again," Gene Hackman decided he was done. "Shut the fuck up and get out of my way." Petrie stepped back. The assistant director looked at the ground. The camera operator pretended to adjust his lens. Nobody said a word. Hackman did the scene his way. Then he did the next scene his way. And the next. For the rest of the production, Donald Petrie gave Gene Hackman exactly 0 notes. Maura Tierney, who played the female lead opposite Ray Romano, would later joke in interviews, "Welcome to Mooseport" was the film that forced Gene Hackman into retirement. She was making a joke about how bad the movie was, but she was also telling the truth. Production wrapped in the summer of 2003. Welcome to Mooseport was released on February 20th, 2004. It opened in 4th place at the box office. It made $14.6 million against a $30 million budget. Rotten Tomatoes gave it a 13% rating. Critics were brutal. Bland. Toothless. A waste of talent. Some reviewers praised Hackman's performance. William Arnold of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer wrote that he delivered a detailed, delightful, comic performance that never quite disintegrates into caricature. But even Arnold admitted that the quality of the writing is nowhere near the standard of Hackman's performance. It didn't matter. By the time those reviews came out, Gene Hackman had already made his decision. On July 7, 2004, Hackman appeared on Larry King Live. It was supposed to be a routine promotional interview. Larry King asked him about his career, his process, his plans. "So what's next for you, Gene?" King asked. "What are you working on?" Hackman smiled, a small, tired smile. "I don't have a project, Larry. If you have a script, I'll read it." King laughed. He thought it was a joke. "Come on," King said. "You must have something lined up." Hackman shook his head slowly. The smile stayed on his face, but his eyes told a different story. "It's probably all over," he said. "This is it." The audience wasn't sure how to react. Some people laughed nervously. King moved on to another question. But Gene Hackman wasn't joking. After that interview, he disappeared. He moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, with his wife Betsy Arakawa, a classical pianist he had married in 1991. He bought a house in the desert. He closed the door on Hollywood, and he never opened it again. At first, people in the industry thought it was temporary, a break, a sabbatical. Hackman had done it before. He'd stepped away from acting for 4 years in the late 70s before coming back. But months passed, then years. Scripts arrived at his agent's office, hundreds of them. Directors called, Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, Clint Eastwood. Studios offered millions of dollars for a single film. Gene Hackman said no to all of them. In 2008, 4 years into his retirement, a Reuters reporter finally got Hackman to explain why he had walked away. Hackman was promoting a novel he had co-written, a Civil War story called Escape from Andersonville. The reporter asked if he missed acting. "I missed the actual acting part of it," Hackman said. "It's what I did for almost 60 years, and I really loved that. But the business for me is very stressful." Then he revealed the truth. The straw that broke the camel's back was actually a stress test that I took in New York. The doctor advised me that my heart wasn't in the kind of shape that I should be putting it under any stress. His heart, the organ that had been warning him since 1990, the organ that had finally forced him to listen. Gene Hackman hadn't retired because of Welcome to Mooseport. He hadn't retired because of Donald Petrie. He hadn't retired because Hollywood didn't want him anymore. He had retired because his body had given out. And once he made that decision, he never looked back. In 2011, GQ magazine asked him if he would ever make another film. "I don't know," Hackman said. "If I could do it in my own house, maybe, without them disturbing anything, and just 1 or 2 people." He was joking, mostly. The truth was that Gene Hackman had found something he'd been looking for his entire life: peace. He wrote 5 novels during his retirement. He rode his bicycle through the streets of Santa Fe every day. In 2012, he was hit by a pickup truck while cycling. He survived. He kept riding. In 2008, he made one final public appearance that stunned everyone who saw it. Guy Fieri was filming an episode of Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives at Harry's Roadhouse in Santa Fe. The cameras were rolling when Fieri noticed an older man sitting at a table near the window. It was Gene Hackman, eating breakfast at his favorite local diner. Fieri walked over. They chatted on camera. Hackman was friendly, relaxed, nothing like the intense, volatile man who had terrorized film sets for 40 years. "This is one of my favorite spots," Hackman told Fieri. "The scrapple is great." The clip went viral after Hackman's death. People couldn't believe it. One of the greatest actors in cinema history, appearing on a Food Network show, talking about scrapple. But that was who Gene Hackman had become, a man who ate breakfast at diners. A man who rode his bicycle, a man who wrote novels and watched old movies and lived quietly in the desert with his wife. He did emerge from total retirement twice. In 2016 and 2017, he narrated 2 military documentaries, The Unknown Flag Raiser of Iwo Jima and We, the Marines, both connected to his own service as a United States Marine from ages 16 to 21. Just hearing his voice was a thrill for fans. That gravelly authority, that unshakable presence, but those would be his final works. On February 26, 2025, the world learned that Gene Hackman was dead. He was found in his Santa Fe home alongside his wife Betsy and their dog. He was 95 years old. The tributes came immediately. Clint Eastwood, who had directed Hackman to his second Oscar in Unforgiven, said he was too good not to be performing. Bill Murray, remembering their time on the Royal Tenenbaums, called him a tough nut, but added, "He was brilliant. When you see the movie, it's a real piece of work." Francis Ford Coppola posted on Instagram, "The loss of a great artist, always cause for both mourning and celebration." And everyone asked the same question they had been asking for 20 years. Why did he walk away? The answer was simple and complicated. He walked away because his heart told him to, because the stress was killing him, because 40 years of fighting directors and battling studios and pouring himself into performances had taken everything he had. But he also walked away because he was Gene Hackman. He didn't need to explain himself. He didn't need a farewell tour. He didn't need anyone's permission. He just needed to be done. Donald Petrie never spoke publicly about what happened on the set of Welcome to Mooseport. Neither did most of the people who were there that day. But the story spread through Hollywood anyway. The day Gene Hackman told a director to shut the fuck up and then vanished from the industry forever. It fit perfectly with everything people knew about him. The intensity, the volatility, the absolute refusal to compromise. He had spent his entire career fighting for control, fighting against directors who saw actors as tools, fighting against studios that saw performers as products, fighting against everyone who tried to tell him how to do his job. And in the end, he won. He walked away on his own terms. He lived 22 years in peace. He died in his own home, with his wife, surrounded by the silence he had earned. That's the real story of Gene Hackman's last film. Not a story about a bad movie, not a story about a difficult actor. A story about a man who knew when it was time to stop. A story about a man who said 8 words to a director and then said nothing to Hollywood for 20 years. Gene Hackman was 73 years old when he made his last film. He was 95 when he died. Those 22 years belonged to him, not to Hollywood, not to the audience, not to anyone, just to Gene. And that, more than any Oscar, is his greatest legacy. He didn't let the machine grind him up. He shut it down, and he walked away.